It was a calm, cool fall evening in San Diego, California. And while the city was busy, 911 dispatch was even busier. They received a call at about 9:15 p.m. from a distraught young woman. The caller, Kristen Rossum, relayed to police that her husband was unresponsive. When police arrived and assessed the scene, they were originally going to rule it as an accidental suicide. However, once the autopsy and the toxicology reports came back, they would uncover a tale of sex and seduction, drugs and addiction, along with one woman's obsession to have her cake and eat it too. Did Kristen Rossum almost commit the perfect crime? Smart, blonde, and drop-dead gorgeous, Kristen Rossum was born in October of 1976. Her childhood was one that most would love. Living in sunny California, growing up in a big mansion, she was the eldest of 3 children. Her parents doted on her being the only girl. Kristen Rossum's childhood was filled with family vacations, private yachts, and an all-girls private school where her parents assumed she would receive the best education. Kristen, however, craved more. And she got it in the form of a friend. One night when they were going to a football game, the friend offered Kristen crystal meth. And from there, Kristen began a downward spiral into partying, drugs, and eventually addiction. Her grades began to slip. She began to cut class. And even worse, she began stealing money and items from family and friends. While her parents tried to keep her at home, thus preventing a scandal and preventing Kristen from doing something drastic, they really didn't know what to do. So, at the advice of her father, Kristen Rossum went south of the border to Tijuana, Mexico. Her family thought with a change of scenery that maybe Kristen would get her act together. And one night, while waiting for a train, she dropped her coat, and Greg De Viller would pick it up. And according to Kristen, he was the angel that saved her. It wasn't long before the two began talking regularly, and Greg was smitten. According to family members of Greg, he went on numerous date nights with Kristen, and he fell head over heels for her. Kristen even moved into Greg's home with his roommate, and everything seemed perfect. And it was thanks to Greg that Kristen was able to re-enroll in her university, and she graduated top of her class with her master's. Kristen's family loved Greg. They described him as an angel in disguise. They had gotten their little girl back, and they felt as though Kristen had finally turned her life around. However, they would soon learn it was all smoke and mirrors. Coming up, life imitates art. Can movies come alive? The year was 1999, and Kristen Rossum's life had taken a dramatic 360-degree turn. She was the blushing new bride of Greg De Viller. She was a new homeowner as she and Greg had moved back to their home of California. She also was the newest member of the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office as a toxicologist. Greg landed a job at a biohazard firm. It looked as though the couple were on the up and up. From the outside looking in, Greg De Viller and Kristen Rossum had a life that most would envy. Greg even spoke about having children with Kristen in the near future. He thought she would be a good mother. However, Kristen's friends knew better. Kristen was not one to stay monogamous, and whether she saw something or someone she liked, Kristen took it. She made no bones about her relationships, and within a year of her marriage, she had begun an affair with her boss, the couple would write intense and sexually passionate love letters to each other, even writing IOUs for lovemaking nights. They also began attending conferences as a couple. And it also was during this time that Kristen began her meth habit again. Dealing with the stressors of life, marriage, and a new job, Kristen tried her best to maintain the perfect suburban socialite image. However, Greg De Viller did not know that his life and Kristen's life was about to go up in smoke. Greg De Viller, for his part, thought he was the perfect husband and did everything he could do. That is, until the night of November 6, 2000. It was 9:15 when Greg De Viller was pronounced dead. After Kristen Rossum had notified authorities and told them that her husband was unresponsive, they thought that Greg De Viller had committed suicide and they were going to chalk it up to an accident. However, it wasn't long before Greg's family received word of his death, and it wasn't long after that they began calling the police department themselves, telling them that they need to investigate. They claimed that Kristen Rossum was a drug addict, a sex-fueled temptress who wanted any and everyone but her husband. And when police did a little digging, they found in the toxicology report enough fentanyl to kill over 20 people in Greg's body. They also discovered that at the San Diego Medical Examiner's office, that same amount of fentanyl and meth was missing from the archives. When they brought Kristen in for questioning, she did not appear to be that of a meth addict trying to cover up a crime. However, police knew better. As the months wore on, evidence began to mount, and it wasn't long before Kristen Rossum was the top suspect and the only suspect in her husband Greg De Viller's murder. And that was enough for police. In June of 2001, Kristen Rossum would be formally charged with the murder of her husband Greg De Viller. Her parents paid her $1.25 million bail. Coming up, the American Beauty murder trial. It was November of 2002, and 26-year-old Kristen Rossum found herself on trial in San Diego County for the first-degree murder of her husband Greg De Viller. If convicted, the former toxicologist faced life in prison without parole. Prosecutors allege that Kristen, deep into her meth addiction and having an affair with her boss, poisoned her husband with fentanyl taken from the San Diego County Medical Examiner's office. And then, knowing that they wouldn't test for it, thought she had committed the perfect crime and would get away with it. Motive: Greg threatened to expose her affair and her drug use to her upper-level bosses. Kristen Rossum's defense claimed that Greg De Viller killed himself because Kristen had admitted to leaving him and having an affair. Greg couldn't live with himself. When the jury was sent away to deliberate, they would take over a day to find Kristen Rossum guilty of the first-degree murder of her husband Greg De Viller. In December of 2002, Kristen Rossum was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She continues to serve out her sentence at Chowchilla Women's Prison. However, many questions remain in this case. How could Kristen, a woman with so much potential and so much going for her, be led down a path of destruction, ultimately killing the one person who would have given his life for hers?